Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Senate Bill 442. This deals with our access to firearms by children law, which we passed way back in 1992. And under that bill, currently, it is a Class 3 misdemeanor to recklessly leave a firearm that could be handled then by a youth under 14. This bill is going to be addressing 3 of those aspects. And I must tell you, the main concern for this is teenage suicide. That's kind of the genesis of this. Currently, it's just a Class 3 misdemeanor that can be up to $500. We would make this a felony. In addition, we would raise the age to 18 from 14. And let's see, and we would remove the reckless standard because other states aren't using that standard. Most states now do have similar legislation. We're, perhaps because we were one of the first states to do it, do have younger ages than most, lower penalty than most. And so this is just trying to bring it up to the current reality of teenage suicide. Let's see. Trying to find the numbers on the suicide. These laws are associated with a 64% decrease in self-inflicted gun injuries among youth and an 8.3% reduction in suicide rates in youth 14 to 17.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for the patron? All right. Those who wish to speak in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Nikki Zamosny, I'm the Assistant Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. We want to thank Senator Howell for carrying this bill on behalf of the administration. One of the things that we wanted to make note to you is that according to the Academy, the American Academy on Pediatrics, between 2002 and 2014, on an average, 1,300 kids were killed every year with firearms. So we think this is an important piece of legislation, and we thank the Senator for introducing it.
Let me ask you, since you mentioned the American Academy of Pediatrics, are you familiar with their firearm safety policy statement?
I am not, Senator.
It actually basically, well, it states that that the absence of guns, the total absence of guns from children's homes and communities is the most reliable and effective measure to prevent firearm-related injuries in children and adolescents. And I mean, since you quote the American Association of Pediatrics, I wonder whether on behalf of, and I know Secretary Moran's not here, but whether you all would take the position that the removal of the word recklessly would essentially give public safety officials the ability to cite the American Association of Pediatrics in arguing that any person who leaves a loaded, unsecured firearm anywhere in a house is guilty of violating this.
Senator, we think it's important to make sure that loaded firearms are not being left around children, and so we would recommend striking that language.
Okay, so you want strict liability that if there is a loaded, unsecured firearm anywhere in a house with an 18-year-old or under, that they should be guilty of this crime. That's the administration's position.
That is the position.
Okay, I understand.
Even if they can't get to it? Mr. Chairman?
I understand.
It's if it's
Even if they
unsecured.
can't,
If
even
it's
if
loaded or unsecured.
even if the child can't get to it?
No,
If it was secured, then the child would not be able to get to it.
It's to endanger the life or limb.
Yes.
All right, let's hear from others. And thank you, I appreciate your candor.
Josh Horowitz, Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I want to make the point that suicide is up in the Commonwealth 21% in the last 10 years. One of the most emergent areas of suicide, people often in their late teen years. It's very important to protect them from easy access to firearms. And also, people make very impulsive decisions. We understand that oftentimes the decision to use a firearm in suicide is done within an hour. And so making sure that unsecured firearms are not available to teenagers thinking about suicide is a very important part of suicide prevention.
Mr. Chairman, Andrew Goddard, Virginia Center for Public Safety, and a member of the Virginia Violent Death Reporting Systems Advisory Board. I've seen the data on the teenage suicides, especially amongst males, and there's a spike now in teenage suicides in the under 21, but that includes the area 18 and below. And there's also an increase in above 50 for males. And it's a serious thing. We need to keep these kids away from the guns. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, those who wish to speak in opposition.
This is Philip Van Cleve, President of VCDL. 3 things on this bill. Number one, there are people under 18 that are perfectly fine to be around firearms. Their parents have trained them, and many lives have been saved because somebody under 18 has had access to a firearm during a home invasion. Number two, this takes away from the parents their ability to decide if their children are mature enough. But it's so broad, and we're talking a felony here. This bill isn't fooling around. It's going to make a felon out of somebody. If a 17-year-old breaks into your home, technically, and you've got a gun that you left unsecured, you weren't expecting the 17-year-old to burglarize your home, you could now be charged with a felony. Also, if your wife happened to bring home a neighbor's kid you weren't expecting to come in the house, you have an unsecured gun, you could be charged with a felony. So we oppose.
Aaron Looper, the National Rifle Association, also is kind of citing the reasons that Phil said for opposing, but also we think current law is sufficient. There is no one-size-fits-all model for securing firearms in your home, as well as we believe it's a gun owner's responsibility to safely and secure and store their firearms.
All right, thank you.
Bob Sadler, South Richmond. In addition to being a lobbyist for VCDL, I'm also a life member of the National Rifle Association. And one of the benefits of that is a monthly magazine. That monthly magazine contains a monthly column called The Armed Citizen. And virtually every single month, there is at least one instance of a minor having to defend themselves from a home invader. It would be a shame to leave them unprotected. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Senator Stewart.
Mr. Chairman, what concerns me about this, I was in the Marine Corps and I fired all these weapons and I don't do it anymore, but I hunt and I love to hunt. And I've taught my children to hunt. And at 17, my son was more responsible with a gun than probably more 35-year-olds. And if he and I went dove hunting and walked in the house and I put my gun in the corner of the house and didn't realize, or even if I did realize that there was a shell left in the magazine but not in the chamber, and went in to get something to eat and there was a 17-year-old who was perfectly responsible with a gun, I'm guilty of a felony. And I've worked pretty hard all my life and I've been a law-abiding citizen and I've never broken the law that I'm aware of or intentionally, but all of a sudden I'm a pretty significant criminal. That concerns me.
But you
realize that's what this bill would do?
Yes, and you realize you would have left a loaded firearm unsecured around children.
A 17-year-old who was as capable as any 50-year-old at firing it and understands that you treat it as it's loaded and you're careful with it and all those things that you teach people who are responsible gun owners.
And Mr. Chairman, and your son or the friend who was in the kitchen may be suicidal.
Mr. Chairman, I understand and I appreciate what Senator Howell's trying to do, but this goes too far for me. I'm going to move to pass this bill by indefinitely.
It's been moved and seconded to pass the bill by indefinitely.
Substitute motion.
Can I ask a question?
Let's ask the question first, and then you can make your substitute motion.
I'd ask Senator Howell, is it your intent in the first line to prevent anybody under the age of 18 from picking up a loaded gun or going hunting?
No.
If you live on a farm. There are other parts of the state that
That's not what they're talking about.
Well, yeah, and I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out, because I agree with your purpose, but I'm trying to figure out how it would be lawful for any person under the age of 18 to have a loaded, secured firearm that they perhaps got from their parents without exposing their parent to some criminal liability. Say, if a parent, if I had a child under the age of 18 and I gave that child a 22 to go rabbit hunting, and that 22 was loaded, well, a loaded 22 is obviously, a firearm has some inherent danger. By giving that child the firearm to go hunting, under this language, am I exposing myself to criminal liability?
Absolutely.
To felony liability?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I might attempt to answer, we do believe the language in line 14 in a manner as to endanger the life or limb of any child, of any person. It was the intention of that language, I believe, which is current law, to apply to the situation you described.
Well,
there has to be some
But isn't that what
behavior.
recklessly did?
Well, we wouldn't, if we want to reinsert the word reckless so we can avoid the strict liability questioning with respect to the chair has identified, and certainly in Senator Deeds' question,
I'm
may
not
very
sure.
well address
Well,
that.
That's not what your Homeland Security Deputy Secretary was advocating, or the American Association of Pediatrics advocates.
I think it was important to have that conversation, recognizing this committee is not willing to adopt strict liability in the situation. I think
Mr. Chair, if the motion for a PBI is withdrawn, I'd make a substitute motion that we strike the word recklessly, or strike the reinsert recklessly.
I second that.
But we have to, the motion was.
There is a motion to pass the bill by indefinitely. That was seconded.
I understand. Mr. Chair, I did say that it had to be withdrawn.
All right, Senator Lucas.
Yes,
All right, there's
Mr. Chairman.
the substitute motion is that the bill be passed.
Mr. Chairman, I believe it has to go to finance. I hate to say that.
And re-referred to the Committee on Finance. The motion is to adopt the bill and re-refer to the Committee on Finance. Open the roll. All right.
Ayes 4, noes 11.
All right. Next, we've got Senate bill. Bill fails to report.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, the primary motion was to pass bill by indefinitely. Clerk will open the roll.
Ayes 9, noes
So you
6.
can have it both ways. 797.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.